Yeah, welcome everyone to the second session of the workshop, Global Perspectives on Teaching AI Ethics. So in this session, we're going to talk more about future scenarios. So we've called this session Imagining the Future, How Should AI Ethics Be Taught? And I'm going to briefly start by introducing our main panelists and speakers today, and then we will, again, just like in the first session, have a brief presentation by one of the panelists. So once again, I'm going to start with the people who are joining us online. Jeff Behrends from the University of Harvard. He's a senior researcher and associate senior lecturer on philosophy at Harvard University. And he's also co-director of the Embedded Ethics course at Harvard and director of ethics and technology initiatives at the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics. So thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. Then we have Linda Oghenekaro. Oh my God, I knew I would struggle with this. I'm so sorry. Oghenekaro, who is lecturer and researcher at the University of Port Harcourt in Nigeria, and her field of specialization is computing and information technology. Thank you so much also, Linda, for joining us. Then we have Diana Martin over there, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. And her research areas are engineering ethics, responsibility, and engineering education. And then we have Filippo Santoni, who is associate professor in ethics of technology at Delft University of Technology, also in the Netherlands. And he teaches moral philosophy to students of engineering. So thank you both as well for joining us today. And now I would like to start with a brief presentation by Linda. So I don't know if you have any slides that you would like to share, or otherwise just unmute yourself and start.
Okay, I have a slide to share, so I can go.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'll share it from this end. I don't know. Please, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Linda Oghenekaro from the University of Port Harcourt here in Nigeria, West Africa. And I'll be speaking briefly on the future of teaching AI ethics in computer science and engineering programs. And I'll be looking at what we have done so far too in African universities. So now more than ever, we need to groom students to have personal integrity, because AI systems do not start existing on their own. They are built by human beings, rather by companies run by human beings. So if we prepare our students to value and promote fairness and equality, same notion is translated into AI solutions that it creates. And then teaching AI ethics lies in bringing AI technologies into the classrooms. Sorry, please excuse me. In an experimental manner, so as to consider these technologies from an ethical point. I remember having an exam that most of the students submitted their scripts and noticed that the answers had similar patterns, and I found out that they were making use of the ChatGPT application, and these are the ethical issues we talk about, because we expect on the level and playing ground, everyone is supposed to answer their questions based on their understanding of the course and not use an assisted device or application. And so the future of teaching AI still lies in designing and adopting curriculums that promote human secure, and environmentally friendly approach in building and using AI solutions. We also look at the developing ethical principles for responsible AI that will enforce the creation of explainable models and traceable algorithms. And finally, on the future of teaching AI ethics, we see it going beyond educators and students. We see this teaching engaging more stakeholders like government agencies, end users, developers, industries, and NGOs. So teaching, the future of teaching AI will get to us being more intentional about real life challenges, as like I mentioned here, the AI and bias. The student should be aware that there are several entry points through which bias can come during data, when they're sourcing for their data, maybe from collecting it, curating it, cleaning, labeling. There are several entry points where bias can come in. And for us, in a number of countries here in Africa, we have a lot of minority groups, we have indigenous groups, we have vulnerable sets of persons. So we want to pay attention, more attention to how we can source for data in these different communities and groups. And the manner with which we source or we approach the locals there in their community, it matters. And the manner with which we seek their consent also matters, because we need to make sure that we are not taking advantage of anybody, and that the picture is clearly represented on data. So if there is cultural differences, we should make sure that this difference is also reflected in our data accordingly. And then we also have AI and environments. And we try to see the, looking at students, how do we teach them to consider some environmental topics that have to do with computers and computing. Topics like green energy should be like a priority, because most times building AI models, we might be needing a lot of energy and system resources. So how do we manage them? So we need to incorporate safety, environmental safety rules into AI-related policies. And also looking at AI and privacy, we should get to teach our students now how to seek all necessary consent before sourcing for primary data. And even when we use secondary data, it should be properly referenced. So like ChatGPT talking about training their applications on millions of data, if there are hyperlinks to show the sources, it shows transparency in AI solutions. So for the University of Port Harcourt, like Professor Latesha spoke about in the first session, we got some opportunity from the National University Commission, where we were asked to move beyond the department, because we just have before now we have a Department of Computer Science, but now we've gotten the official permission from the commission to move to Faculty of Computing. But there are a lot of resources needed to be a faculty in terms of infrastructure, personnel, expertise. Yeah, so we were approved to have 7 departments, but we are looking at it that, okay, we had a small beginning, but if we're willing to learn, we can be able to achieve what is demanded of us. And from the positive aspect to looking at the advantages, we are seeing ourselves being open to about 1,500 students from the next academic session. And then we were able to get more personnel, academic staff join us with different expertise. So we before now, our students have always had their projects done individually, but with this approval of having a faculty, we are looking at having projects done on a group level, where you have students across different departments coming together to achieve a different project and having their own different contribution to that project. So we'll be having a variety of disciplines. So as regards to AI ethics, we already we had a little workshop where the staff, faculty members were encouraged to start getting registered for online courses and looking out for collaborations with colleagues that are into the specific field of AI ethics or philosophy of AI, so that we can start growing our knowledge in that area. And so it would be like when we have an opportunity to get the trainer programs from collaborations, we also look out for them. So these are while we await the approval from the commission, these are the proactive steps we are taking. And like she mentioned, we were opportune to include the AI ethics course within the 30% of the CMAS, because we are given that privilege. So we are trying to see how we can bring ourselves up to date as it concerns artificial intelligence ethics. Then for future plan and possibilities, based on the review of literature in AI ethics and what Africa is doing as a whole, we have some countries that are ahead, like Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa, like she mentioned, also some of them in the first session. But what we see, what Africa is working towards, what we expect to see increased participation of African countries in global AI initiatives, such as the Global Partnership on AI, GPA, because presently I believe we have about 29 countries as member states. So, and we African countries are not represented in their numbers there. So we look at how we can be part of this initiative, because that's where you get collaborations, ideas, and to help our home institutions. And secondly, we look at increased number of African universities that offer formal education on AI ethics. So we're looking at it either as a standalone model, or maybe AI topics that are embedded in across several courses. Then we also expect to see a higher representation of countries working on building ethical strategies for the field of AI. We have a lot of universities that are not offering AI courses at the moment, maybe because of lack of expertise or access to technology in terms of maybe starting a research lab for themselves. So based on what is on ground, these are the possibilities that we are working towards. And then number 4 here is improved number of homegrown AI solutions and ethical frameworks, because we have some issues, some problems particular to us as Africans. And so it will be beneficial to us if we're able to use our own local data to build models that are homegrown, that are particular to us in this clients. And then we have number 5 here as increased number of AI national initiatives, having like sensitization programs and hackathons. I have been part of some of them right now, but most of the hackathons we have are just towards data science and not particularly considering artificial intelligence ethics. But now with our growing knowledge of artificial intelligence ethics, when we have these hackathons, when we have these sensitization programs, we direct them towards AI ethics, and it will promote teaching AI ethics in our tertiary institutions. So my closing thoughts is that AI ethics should remain on the front burner of AI research and policy to ensure AI serves and not harm mankind. And addressing the ethical concerns of AI solutions should not in any way hinder the advancement of AI, but rather open up novel, ethical inclined innovations. UNESCO 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda, for the presentation. I would like to now give the other panelists an opportunity to say a few words, and maybe you can respond to Linda's presentation if you have thoughts on that, or maybe just say something about your own experiences, particularly. I think you all have experiences yourself with teaching ethics to computer scientists and or engineering students. So maybe we can start with Jeff, if you like.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for joining today's conversation. And please just tell me to stop talking if I'm taking too long. I don't have a good sense of what kind of length you were hoping for an initial response here. So I'll try for brief for now. So just by way of a little bit of background, I'm working at Harvard University in a variety of ways that come into contact with teaching AI ethics. The most direct way is through this program called Embedded Ethics, which is not a course, but a program that embeds and distributes ethics education modules throughout the already existing CS curriculum here, with the ambition to help students develop skills to identify ethical and social issues, reason through those issues on their own, develop skills enabling them to communicate their reasoned positions to others, and then build toward sharpening their abilities to design ethically and socially responsible systems. So at Harvard, this embedded model that Linda alluded to, and that I imagine may have come up in the first session this morning as well, is sort of the core of not just AI ethics education, but computing ethics education as it happens in CS. So if we're thinking about what the future has in store, as we're thinking about growing from around that core, a few things come to mind. One, kind of really close to the core is just that I think the program's at a point now where we need to sort of identify where the key juncture points in the curriculum are, and to know where to focus our attention, with the ambition of building a kind of coherent and cohesive system of modules. In the early days of this program, which is now 5 or 6 years old, 6 years, I guess, we were basically trying to work in any class that would opt in. So this is all done on a volunteer basis from the CS side. And now that we have massive buy-in, we're working in about 50% of the undergrad CS curriculum here. We can be a little more particular about crafting a pedagogical product at the programmatic level that's cohesive, as I say. But then, I think the more exciting things as we think about the future are imagining, what can grow at sort of a farther remove from the core, so to speak. So one thing that I think Linda is exactly right about is that the future of AI ethics education should conceive of the educational mission, and I think even for people coming from higher ed, like me and like many of us on the call, we should conceive of the educational mission as having a broader scope, right? So ideally, we conceive of the recipients of education as including, as Linda said, end users, executives, other tech professionals, and so on. So, we're thinking about, what kind of non-curricular engagements we can establish for students here that will get them contact with professionals who have worked in AI ethics teams in industry, for example. Actually, I guess the tense in that case is meaningful, since many of them have just been fired. And then thinking, what are the other curricular engagements that we can lean into now? We don't think that the modular approach should be done to the exclusion of standalone courses, for example. And so for us, the modular approach is the core. And now we're in a moment where we can give more attention to what you might otherwise think of as sort of more traditional techniques. Maybe I'll just stop there, but I'm very happy to get into the weeds later about other details about what we've been up to.
All right, yeah. Thank you, Jeff, for now. We will definitely come back to some of those questions and points. Filippo and Diana, who wants to go first?
I will start. First, I want to say how happy I am to be part of an event that brings so many different perspectives to the topic, and this is a shout out to the organizers. Second, I also want to situate a bit myself. I'm a philosopher and educational researcher based in a philosophy department, and we are almost 40 people. And we are not teaching any undergraduate philosophy course. We are almost 40 philosophers teaching engineering students. And the educational approach that TU Eindhoven is trying to promote and develop and incorporating many courses as possible in the next decade is challenge-based learning. And by that we mean, and in response to Linda's fifth point of bringing different stakeholders in the educational process, so through challenge-based learning, we aim to bring some of the important business partners active in the Rainforest region where Eindhoven is located as educational partners to our students, and for students to have the opportunity to work on real-life challenges. And most of these challenges are interdisciplinary in nature, and the courses where students get to learn about ethics are interdisciplinary. So the course I'm teaching, the course I designed on decisions under risk and uncertainty, I have between 70 and 90 students from computer science, but also from chemical engineering or electronic engineering or mechanical engineering. And we try to make sense of these ethical topics in connection with the different specializations they bring, and also in connection with the line of activity of different societal actors they engage with. So computer science related challenges brought by a former student team who is now a startup on the development of cognitive development training app, and they're already piloting this with the juniors of PSD Eindhoven. And in terms of assessment, when I'm coming back to a point that was mentioned in the first session, for this course, we are looking at risk, and the students deliver risk analysis as written report. But I can give the example of another course coordinated by my colleague Hunter Bombard, also a philosopher with a computer science colleague, on data analysis and ethics, where students get to do some coding, and there is the teaching team that is like, okay, show me the value in this code. Where did you put values? I want to see the value that you are reflecting on. And linking again with Linda's presentation, an aspiration that I have, but also a struggle, is how to help our students, my students, let's say 18, 21-year-old, think a bit broader than this ecosystem in which they are situated, and in which the partners with which they collaborate are situated, and to think also of the users of their future product in a more global perspective. And I don't want to take more time. I want to share with you some of the things I tried to do as a teacher later on in the follow-up questions that will be coming our way. So I'm now passing on a bit further to the west. I think you are to the west of Eindhoven,
Yes.
or to the east now, but to the west institutionally.
Thank you. So it's yeah, I can only share what Diana said in terms of thanking the organizers for this, and also I'm quite jealous that you really was standing Stephanie in the coffee break. I was jealous that you really managed to make this a global event. Everybody tries to do that, and you were quite successful, and so congratulations on that. And speaking of the global perspective, the Netherlands is a small country in the world. I was trying to find a way to paraphrase Neil Armstrong thing about it. But okay, I didn't come up with that. It's a small country in the world, but I think it has played a big role in engineering ethics and engineering education. I think I'm from Italy. I moved to Delft 11 years ago, and already there the department had already existed for 15 years or so. So the Department of Ethics of Engineering at Delft has been around for more than 25 years. And I think it's an interesting story with, I think, lots of success, but also obviously some things looking in the future that have to be improved. And I think that the main successes are, as Diana said, is comparable with also a department of 50 people working full-time in research and education in engineering ethics. So that's obviously a plus. And it's not our credit, it's the credit of the institution who has created this possibility for us to do not only AI ethics. The ethics is a relatively recent thing. Traditionally, we have done engineering ethics again, because I'm always kind of divided when I'm asked what I think about all of this attention to AI ethics. I say, on the one hand, it's great because now people realize that engineering ethics is important. On the other hand, could be too narrow, right? And because if you think the famous or infamous examples of the trolley problems, the moral dilemmas with self-driving cars and whatnot, they're great in, capture the attention on the ethical dimensions of design choices. But, obviously, it's not only about AI. When you design airplanes, bridges, buildings, chemical plants and whatnot, you encounter all of these design trade-offs and dilemmas that will impact people's life. So, and again, in medical, it's not a surprise that has been probably the first, discipline, medical ethics, because it's clearly a matter of life and death. But all of the engineering projects are a matter of life and death somehow. So I think it's nice to have also looking at the future, having this broader perspective of AI ethics as just one instantiation of engineering ethics or ethics of technology. And in that sense, also having a closer, I would say, maybe adding to what Diana said, a closer connection, the ephemeral position we have is that we have time for research and teaching. And so the two things reinforce each other, because basically we can do these. So for instance, in teaching, we have a similar model like a case-based or challenge-based, where we try to do what Marcus said, to really taking the engineering students keeping them close to their discipline, taking a design perspective, what's the impact of what I'm doing and projecting and designing here, while at the same time seeing the philosophical, ethical, societal depth in what they're doing. And this kind of reflects also a research methodology that we are very fond of in depth, which is the good old value-sensitive design or design for values. That again comes from all the way from the 90s in the US and also from some work in the Netherlands. And the idea is again that also answering a bit the question this morning, what's the role of philosophy? So as I say that as a philosopher, philosophy can do a lot, but cannot do it all, obviously. So you need technical people to help us understanding what are the technical limitations, possibility, opportunities, and we need social science. We need lawyers, we need anthropology, we need, you name it, history. And these are the triangle of value-sensitive design. Whenever you design something, you need a conceptual analysis of what are the principal values you want to embed into the technology, with a technical knowledge of how to do that. But you also need this empirical awareness of what are the societal environment in which this technology will happen and will be shaped, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So long story short, I think if looking at the future, I think that the strengths of the Delft, which by the way is not only the Delft, so now that's another important development. Recently, there has been a federation of the 4 Dutch universities, so Delft, Eindhoven, Twente, and Wageningen, and all of them have a philosophy department. And now there is this 4TU ethics, which is a federation of the 4 philosophy department of the technical university. So it's creating a massive pool of research and you know in ethics of technology. And so I think this experience has shown that a structural approach is needed, a lot of funding is needed because you need people, you need time to prepare research, and that's still also one of the limits. Still, we are mainly assessed as researchers. So after all, everybody's telling us that education is important, and it's true. And then university is investing a lot because now every single master should have at least one course in philosophy or ethics, and every bachelor has this more module-based, similar to the one was mentioned by Jeff and David this morning. More like across the 3 years of the bachelor, they have modules, but the level of the master is more courses, and that's I think a success. I think next steps is really also creating the space for more research about education, not assessing us mainly about our productivity as researchers, but saying, hey, this year I published 2 papers less, but hey, I'm creating a fantastic course, or I have innovated something, you know, and this is still not recognized. I love the thing about stakeholder involvement because I think it's working well, at least in Delft, for research, because we have fundings for creating these responsible innovation projects, which again requires you multidisciplinarity and stakeholder involvement, company, policy, agencies, NGOs, as also it was said by Linda before. But in education, this is more difficult, I think, for us at least. At the end, it's still the professor doing the talking and not societal actors helping us doing it. And also the interaction with the engineering professors. So the advantage of having this big bunch of philosophers is that you have enough people power to do the teaching, but also maybe you have less incentive to do more collaboration with the engineering professors. So engineering professors know, okay, we got the philosophers, then we'll figure it out, which I think is not necessarily the best setup. I'll stop here for now.
Right, thank you. So this basically, it brings me, or it makes me wonder, you've all mentioned that it basically needs to be broader, the whole field of teaching AI ethics or philosophy to engineers and computer scientists. It needs to be broader. So we've heard about all these different subfields and all the different skills and expertise needed ideally. So it kind of makes me wonder who should do the teaching, or like what should the qualifications maybe be, or the expertise. So is it actually fair to say, oh, we just bring in a philosopher and teach ethics to computer scientists, or is it fair to expect someone who studied computer science to then teach ethics? So do you have any thoughts on what the ideal situation would be?
Very briefly, I can just, for what I just said, I think that the advantage of having a research department is that in principle, you can train through these interdisciplinary research projects. So the work you do with the research project, which is hard work, understanding each other, building up a shared language, understanding the philosophical and the technical and social science perspective, then you can transfer that to the teaching. So one way is kind of exploiting the work you do on the research side, on the teaching side. That would be one way.
So ideally, an interdisciplinary group of people who can teach different skills, different levels of expertise. Does anyone else have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, +1 in some ways, I suppose. If I understood the idea correctly, you know, the idea that Filippo just gave voice to, I think is a promising one. It's one, I suppose, that will, you know, pay off at, you know, a wide enough scale on some kind of like medium or medium longish, you know, time horizon, once enough people have gone through the sort of training and enculturation in the right sorts of environments. But I don't know, maybe you know, as a philosopher, I'm like deeply skeptical that right now the solution is to hand off the kind of education we're imagining to philosophers. That's in part because I think, at least in the US context, the kind of cross-disciplinary expertise that's needed to do this kind of work well has not, until very recently, I think, been valued in philosophy as, you know, as an academic discipline that manifests itself in a particular way. So I'll just say that I really fell into all of this sideways. I didn't, you know, in my training as a philosopher during grad school, think that I would end up having any expertise in this area, and in fact wasn't doing ethics, any applied ethics or practical ethics of any kind. And my entry point into all of this was through co-teaching with a computer scientist, and I was very scared and felt really silly through a lot of it, because it's hard to, you know, once you're mid-career, kind of start over and learn learn as much as you can about an entirely separate field. But I think that, you know, that was absolutely essential for me to avoid, you know, massive pitfalls, I think, where, you know, people who have ethics expertise but not enough technical competence come in and try to have something to say. So, you know, and embedded ethics retains this kind of collaborative spirit where we bring typically philosophers, although we're not sort of like wedded to that idea. So we think of it as like normative experts, and pair them, you know, with experts in CS to build pedagogical content. So in the short term, anyway, I'm a huge fan of the idea that the pedagogical work really needs to be collaborative.
I also endorse this approach. I'm a big fan of co-teaching, especially when the team has this mixed socio-technical background, in order to bring a more comprehensive view of the subject. And I think it also gives credibility to students when they see that a technical instructor find something of value in the ethical content they are exposed to. Generally, if you as a philosopher tell an engineering student, or I tell an engineering student, you know, this is an important topic, she or he looks at me a bit skeptically. But if one of the partners from industry, or if a technical teaching staff comes with the same view, that student immediately starts to appreciate more the relevance of the ethical content for the work she or he will be doing as a future professional. And in addition to this mixed socio-technical teaching team, I also see the value of having an educational researcher, and more specifically an AI ethics education researcher or an engineering ethics education researcher, complementing these teaching efforts by looking at students' engagement with the topics, looking at potential ways of formulating teaching content or assignments, or even the formulation of ethics learning goals. And this is, I think, quite new in the infrastructure. Such a role, I think, is quite new in the infrastructure of our universities, where aren't yet dedicated positions for STEM education researchers to make these efforts also more viable on the long term, rather than trying to learn intuitively what works.
And that basically it brings me to another question, because we've heard about all these great examples, but it makes me wonder, should we have, what kind of an approach to teaching AI ethics should we take? Like a universal approach, a national approach, a continental approach? Should every single higher education institution come up with their own guidelines? I don't know, there's probably not a perfect answer to this, but do you have any ideas of what you think would be the best approach, also considering that we ideally want to avoid always taking a Western approach, a Eurocentric approach to things like ethics, and incorporating other perspectives as well.
When I hear the term universal approach, in general, I feel that this refers to a Western approach and most often a US approach, as in the case of engineering ethics, and maybe less so in the case of AI ethics, that is spread spreads throughout the world, rather than potentially localized approaches that are in dialogue with each other, and a way of making these different situated approaches and cultural lenses viable partners in this dialogue of ideas. I would favor opening this discussion. It's also the field of research, and such an event, I think, has a merit of opening at least a discussion on how to bring localized perspectives and specific cultural lenses in a global dialogue on AI ethics education, rather than trying to globalize other regions through the points we developed here in our Western bubble.
Does anyone else want to add to this?
Yeah, I'll just say I think that's basically exactly right. I mean, in part, like the higher ed sector is too varied to think that you know, like a particular way of doing this. Certainly in terms of content, which is what I took the questions to sort of mostly be about. It would take a lot of convincing for me to think that you know, the thing to do is like all agree on some relatively narrowly circumscribed set of ideas or principles or values that this kind of education should embody. That's a little bit reflected in the way that we've been thinking about things, where the kinds of learning outcomes that we've identified are primarily skills-based and not primarily you know, content mastery based. You know, one of the things that makes the educational mission hard and the research mission hard is that the landscape shifts so fast. And so, you know, what we really want to do, or I think, is you know, train up folks who have a kind of nimbleness and who are ready to take new challenges as they come. And then just very briefly, I just wanted to call attention to a comment that Diane added in the chat that I think is related. I'm not sure if the room can see the chat, but Diane noted a couple of challenges with the sort of interdisciplinary approaches that a lot of us have given voice to here, namely, you know, how to get, you know, Diane's coming from the CS side, so like, how do you get the philosophers interested in doing this kind of stuff in the first place? And then, you know, there are often monumental resource challenges. And so I think these are of a kind, because of course we should expect these kinds of challenges to look very different depending on the institutional context. So I like very much want to disavow any appearance that, you know, I'm like plumping for a particular way of, you know, not just content, but particular way of doing this education that should work everywhere. You know, we have different students, we have different educational aims, we have different resources, and I think we just need to find, you know, what works in a variety of contexts.
If we, in addition to that, sorry, very quickly, I mean, just what I was saying about the broadening the scope of AI ethics can also be an antidote to the temptation of seeing this universalizing, neutral technology are spreading around. Because if you look at the history of other technologies, you will see clearly, you know, the colonial history of a lot of big engineering projects and so on and so forth. And maybe you will be more trained to recognize also some colonial dimensions of present day AI, which is less visible because AI looks like, you know, this shiny, clean, neutral tool. And so again, I guess a bit of, you know, historical depth and then broadening of the picture about technology could also help, you know, avoiding the traps of, a the illusion of universalism and the wrongness of is a bit of colonialist approach.
I wonder if Linda, if you're still there, if you wanted, because we've lost your picture, if you wanted to add anything, feel free. If you want to, no.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. I wanted to join my voice to the other panelists as regards to the part where Professor talked about the handshake, because the topic on AI ethics is a topic that, how will I say, at a point, it's a topic that everybody will have something to do with, as in every discipline, we will all come together because it cuts across. So it's since we all have our home issues particular to us, so the part of having a local approach, but having a handshake with other approaches, that's where the unity comes in. So irrespective of our discipline, it's ethics borders down, just like how computational thinking started. Many people thought it was just particular to computer science field, but now computational thinking has now become like a soft skill that even if you're in chemistry, biology, if you have a computational thinking skill, you attend to your problems in a very intelligent way, and in a way that you can, put it together and get a computer to do almost same thing that you've done. So it's just going that way. Ethics is something that that eventually touches every sphere. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It kind of makes me wonder if we need to take even a step further back and start at an even lower level or a younger level to teach things like digital literacy, media skills, like at secondary school level. I don't know how well implemented these things are already in your countries or regions, but it sounds to me like university is almost too late to make people aware of these things.
And I just add something. I think, obviously AI has many different elements, different aspects. Some of the aspects can be country specific, and some of this can be quite good to become something universal. For example, in terms of fighting misinformation, I think nowadays the AI, landscape of technology changing is really fast. We need to bring down to educate everybody to become the gatekeeper of the misinformation. Even the young children, they need to be educated. So this misinformation is going to be a massive problem. Then everybody has become a gatekeeper to recognize the problem, to identify the issues, misinformation, and fight for it from, reporting it. This is a massive system that needs to be developed. So I definitely think that, a universal scheme, something that can be made really clear, easy to digest by everybody globally, that would be really good.
Okay, and also talking about starting at an early age, it's already on, like it's not that we call it ethics when we are talking to the younger ones in nursery and primary, but I think it's more like values, more like morals, like respecting people's privacy, factoring in people's opinion. So we actually teach them at that lower level, but we don't really call it ethics as in ethics. So we just introduce them in terms of moral value, cultural values, societal values. So I think it's on. It's on.
I think that's a really good point, also because we keep using the term ethics and philosophy, but it makes me wonder, like, what are these specific skills, or what are these specific values that we want to teach students or practitioners? Don't know if you want to.
In my section right now, I was mentioning this before in one conversation. There's a big debate about the name ethics of technology because, as was mentioned before, it's politics, it's political economy, it's sociology. So I think, and a colleague of mine, quite cynically and pragmatically saying the only reason why our department is called ethics is because it's more acceptable for the engineering people, because if you tell them that you want them to talk politics, they will get nervous because they no, we don't want to be involved in the political debate. But ethics sounds more like innocuous as well. It probably is just how to behave, like. But if you ask me, it's definitely more than ethics or philosophy. It's politics, political economy. It's a social, social science. It's more than that.
Yes, Alan wanted to chime in.
Well, I really support Filippo. I think this is absolutely the case, and I think it's worth considering at this point because it does suggest that maybe we should be saying some different things. In particular, I think it speaks to a position of privilege already to say every local place should have the autonomy to define their own views on ethics, because the reality is they don't have that freedom. And my own work with AI developers on the African continent shows that they have no choice. They have to use whatever tools Microsoft gives them, or Google gives them, or Amazon gives them. They actually have no autonomy to decide what kind of AI technology they can use, and they actually have no opportunity to say to the people who are giving them access to tools, we don't like your ethics. And actually, in one sense, this is an opportunity, I think, where leadership could come from countries like on the African continent, because they're not already as implicated as we are here in the activities of those corporations. So I think this is one of the areas where in a much more difficult situation relative to medical ethics, where most young people training to be doctors have the ambition to work for an ethical institution. Whereas my students in computer science, their ambition is to work for Facebook or Google or Amazon, who are known and acknowledged by all AI ethics researchers not to be ethical organizations. And they're founded on surveillance capitalism, and the technologies that they give to us are technologies that are predicated on surveillance capitalism as the source of their data and as the origin of the computing platforms. So actually, we are, if we were to genuinely be ethical, we would actually ask questions about, why don't we tell our students not to go and work for those companies? Well, that would be a much bigger problem. And maybe this is one of the reasons why we invite people to come in from philosophy departments to teach, because they're not as implicated, they're not already compromised like we are.
It's even worse now because they're all going to the wall of wall of AI race into something else.
So I don't know. I'm really pleased you're still here, Linda. And I have just said something on behalf of colleagues in Africa, and I wouldn't want to do that without checking with you whether you feel that what I say has some truth on it.
So was that directed to me? Please come again.
Yes, it was. I was asking you whether you feel that in an African institution that actually we don't really have any choice about what AI platforms you use, because you just have to use whatever is sent to you from America.
Okay. No, it is now. Before now, whatever comes to Africa, we see it, okay, we are privileged, we have an access to this and we use. But now, due to knowledge, people are becoming more aware that is not whatever is available now becomes desirable. No. So if with the right knowledge and especially for us researchers, okay, if we already have a plan of carrying out this particular research, let me say in a particular community, and if we have, for instance, we get a grant and we have access to tools or we have access to technologies, we look at it to make sure that it is in line with what we are doing. I've actually had colleagues that have actually opted out from some research teams for some reasons. So they are also Africans, and now we know there is actually a level playing ground for everybody. Has about let me say an opportunity to an extent. So it might not be, we might not get all the opportunities, but where we are now, we believe we have enough to start, especially in this discipline that it's really very fast moving. The computer science discipline is really very fast moving, and we are trying to catch up. But taking everything that comes to us without due diligence, I think we've gone past that to an extent. Yes, we have.
It just reminded me of a question that was asked or put in the chat during the first session by Johnny Penn. I'm not sure if he's in the chat or in the meeting still, but he pointed out something very related to this and very important, I guess, and that is, if we consider all the big tech companies, mostly in the States, and then they're huge, or them letting go of AI specialists, AI ethics specialists, how does that influence the teaching of ethics to future engineers and computer scientists? Can we separate that? Can that exist independently of all these major companies who drop AI ethics?
I think you should. I mean, when I was mentioning that we should invest in public universities, departments getting bigger in AI ethics and ethics engineering, one reason is that if we don't that, the ethics department of the big companies will do the ethics, and I don't think this is what we want. And the public debate will do the ethics, which is fine. It's nothing wrong with that, but there should also be a counterpart in the public universities. So my general question is, where is the space for, you know, free research and free speech in technology ethics? That's a big question we should ask ourselves. My university is more than 50% funded by Microsoft or you name it, and you wonder about the freedom of research. So that's a big question, I think.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I suppose I suppose it's a moment for me to reflect on how lucky I am in some ways. I mean, I think that if you know, next week in one of my classes, I spent you know, the entire week attending to the social ills caused by Meta, for example, you know, I would face no retribution of any kind, I think. And that, you know, like, and that's, you know, to Filippo's point, you know, if there are spaces in the academic arena where people retain that degree of safety, which is not something we can take for granted, but if there are such spaces, then I very much like the idea that it's in those spaces that that a lot of the conversation should play out, precisely because it's not subject to the whims of the market and the capriciousness of you know, tech executives and so on. This is related, and I want to say just two more things kind of in this collection of ideas I think are kind of related. On the you know, on the more direct version of the question, you know, like how would the education change in response to changes in the tech sector, and especially in the US? I guess I think I guess part of me thinks it's that there would be changes, but they wouldn't be changes to what I see as sort of the core mission. So, you know, if we could take for granted, for example, that there were robust AI ethics teams in, you know, Microsoft and Google and so on, then maybe it would make sense to do like some part of the education as a little bit of pre-professionalization, you know, like here's what it looks like to go on into industry and do AI ethics. So let's lean into that a little bit. If that doesn't exist, then obviously it doesn't make sense to do that. But I'm sort of inclined to think that it wouldn't disrupt. If anything, maybe it would like make me more invested in the kind of like skills-based core educational mission as I conceive it. And then just very briefly, last item that I think is related to that's come up in conversation. I'm really interested in the kind of like like the meta conversation about what to call what we're doing, like is ethics a useful tag, or is it misleading, or is it harmful in some way? And lately I've been thinking that I kind of want to dig in my heels, and it seems to me that the antidote to the worry that the term is innocuous, or it's just a kind of like shield for not doing the hard stuff. The antidote is that people like me, people like us, should just do the hard. I mean, we should make it obvious that ethics is not that way. Like in some conversations, people have said, well, why are you talking about ethics? You should be talking about power and oppression. And I think I just don't know how to conceive of doing ethics without thinking deeply about power and oppression in some ways. But the proof is in execution. Like, that means that people like me have to deliver on the promise and really center those kinds of ideas in conversation. And surely, we fall short of that. So I think it's a kind of call to action to hang on to the terminology that really does fit, I think, but has to be it has to be complemented with action. Okay, end of rant. It's a little more soapboxy than I'm used to.
Does anyone else want to add something to this from the
I
panel?
want to pick up on the question of making the students aware of the ethical defaults of bigger corporation, but also in connection with the question asked in the first session about whistleblowing. And in my course, I try to invite guest speakers who, in one way or another, draw attention to ethical problems of societal importance, and that also put to the table the question of who has power or who doesn't have power. And some openly refer to themselves as whistleblowers, while some don't take this label. But one of our guest speakers was Laura Nolan, who is a software engineer, and she was based at Google Dublin. Now she's involved in the campaign Stop Killer Robots. And what put her on this path is that at one point she found out during her work that part of her project will be used by the US Department of Defense through a collaboration with Google to help with the automated analysis of drone surveillance videos. And of course, this later on would have warfare implications. And for students, it was a bit of an eye-opener, because I said, I saw that, I'm a computer science, I'll be a computer scientist. I thought, like, I will not be part of the warfare job market, to call it this way. And I think it made them a bit more aware, seeing this as a personal story, and seeing also the dilemmas involved by software engineers, or someone they could relate to, and the different options they consider for themselves on how to move forward in a way that feels right to them as professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's also a question of responsibility. Like, does every single one who is involved in like the bigger picture share the same level of responsibility? And what should we maybe teach students about responsibility?
I think an interesting methodological question that this raises, and I'm thinking a lot about this, is on top of all the already difficult question about interdisciplinarity and who has to teach what, is what kind of skills do we need? So we have been trained as researchers, but now we are supposed to be able to be like moderators, bring in stakeholders, being able to listen. And it's fascinating. I do law. I think I'm in the middle of a midlife crisis, and I think that's fantastic. I need new challenges. We need to learn how to do role plays, for instance, serious gaming, you name it, right? But the more I think about it, the more it seems like AI ethics needs a lot of new skills and and stuff. And
Unfortunately, I appreciate all these AI educators. I see this as the time that really you have empower yourself, really. It's your mission, is, you're the first frontline in this war, right? Fighting for misinformation, the AI, the wrongdoing. I mean, what can I say? I mean, we're talking about, the robotics, killer robotics. And I was reading an article like a few weeks ago. It was on a main publication. It says that by 2030, the entire British Army can be AI-powered robotics. Well, I don't know what to take about. I mean, should I be happy? Well, we finally have people to fight for us, but not people that fought fight for us. But then again, we just don't know what is the world is taking us. I think, yes, to educators, there's nothing can do, but I just think that as AI educators, this is time that you need to do something. I mean, to empower yourself, take on some missions. I mean, from Microsoft, 50%, your university funding.
Since it is a recording, I want to clarify what I said. Speaking of power, I'm looking fire. So dear colleagues at university, so the real data is that more than 50%. No, so thanks for bringing that up because I wanted to clarify that. So more than 50% of the university is private fundings.
Okay.
Among private fundings, there is also big techs. There is also Shell, other nice partners. So it's not only Microsoft. I want to clarify and making things worse. There's also big fossil fuels company in other. No, but thank you for giving the opportunity to clarify this and to make my position even worse.
All right, I think Bill, you wanted to say something?
Can I ask a sort of building up from this or leading from this, can I ask a practical question about how to prepare students for the workplace? I mean, so AI deployment is unusual. I mean, you can teach people, how to react to something individually, but when they leave, they'll join, say if they join a tech company, even a small one, they'll join a group that works and they'll have a project manager, and the project manager will make sure that they get the data that they need and it's all delivered on time. And they'll consult with the lawyers, and the lawyers will say what data they're allowed to use and what they're not going to use. Is the type of ethics education they're getting at the moment preparing them well to work in that environment? Or should we put on particular types of training to prepare them for what they're actually likely to encounter in the workplace?
To be honest, I don't know, and I don't think so. What I tell students is, and also having these guest speakers who have encountered real and tough ethical problems in the workspace, is you probably will encounter at one point a problem of ethical security.
Sorry, the reason I brought it up is I was trying to actually sort of take us back from the killer robot, because most of what the people have to work with on a day-to-day basis is not killer robots. I mean, if you have a killer robot, okay, the right thing to do is kill it. But most of the time it's sort of a gradual approval of decisions over time, and then all of a sudden there you are. And so what I'm more curious about is how you prepare people to do the correct thing in small increments day to day in the workplace.
So the answer is still the same. I just gave now an example of guest speakers, but there are guest speakers who are also talking about, asking to specify or not to report data that is not convenient. So the way in which an ethical problem can appear, let's say, a small scale or rarely encountered as killer robots, or more frequent as would be, let's say, the case of how to handle data. And the answer to all this situation is that, it will be messy. It will be messy, it will be uncomfortable, and we prepare them in a way not to treat this as in a passive manner and say, okay, we go to the flow, but to try to gain some agency in different ways, either by bringing this problem to other co-workers and maybe together as a group to think of a situation. And one thing we tell them, okay, if you bring this also to someone higher up and nobody dismiss it, be sure that that company has a long tradition of ethical misconduct. They are not paid about it. At one point, it will just spill over in one way or another. So be comfortable also in sometimes leaving and drawing attention from the outside, or trying to find out the role of regulatory bodies in addressing these situations. And I think now in our times, these problems are more easily brought to the surface via media. We had the big Terrano scandal. It's not AI ethics, but the many Netflix documentaries and podcasts made it a bit, I think, more comfortable for professionals to take this whistleblowing stance. But we don't have in our toolkit for preparing them, do this, do that. More of awareness raising the role in telling them about the probability of encountering such situations and of how emotionally complicated it may be. So they are not unethical if they find it difficult or they don't know how to handle a situation. I don't know if others have more absolute or more successful strategies to equip students for this moment.
Yes, please feel free to just jump in if you like, online or here.
Sure, I just wanted to say this connects to a thing I wanted to say before about the assessment. And because I think that's really the test. It's not how students feel after the course, did they enjoy, did they think it was good? It's the assessment should be done 20 years later. Fast forward, you are in a company now, and has everything you have learned 20 years ago given you any different kind of capacity to approach? If not, probably you're right. Then it's just not sufficient, or
Yeah, I just want to begin by I think the question is incredibly important and raises I mean, it's just really hard I think to know whether we're having any effect, so speaking to the assessment point, and then just we have hypotheses about what we can do that might help students prepare for these kinds of challenges. It's just so I don't have any sage advice or anything like that, because I think it's hard. I thought maybe a couple of thoughts are worth kind of throwing in the hopper, so to speak. One is that I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the person who asked the question, but as he put it, like, it's one thing if you're in the killer robot company, and it's another thing if you're in, something more mundane. And so one thing that we hear from our graduates is that we just heard from a graduate a couple of weeks ago, and she said, like 75% of the battle in the professional context is just recognizing that you are in one of the interesting decision points, right? Because as you say, most of what you're doing is just caught up in this process of, your program manager has this task and they've delegated in this way, and you're working on X and other people are working on Y. So it takes a lot just to notice, hey, if I follow through exactly on X, it might have this effect. So I mean, maybe there's an optimistic side of that thought, which is ethics education can make a lot of impact by leaning into trying to center that learning outcome, just noticing that you're in a decision point in which important values are at stake. Two other thoughts, I guess. One is that for me, sometimes, I guess this is another optimistic thought, and then I'll end with a pessimistic thought. So the other optimistic thought is that and this is something that'll vary a lot, I think, by institution but for us, sometimes I try to really hold on to the truth that there are lots of people going through the CS undergrad curriculum at Harvard who aren't going to end up as engineers in tech firms, but will end up on professional tracks that are sort of tech adjacent, through which they can wield lots of influence over what happens in the tech sector. So, sometimes I try to remember we're educating not just future engineers or program managers, but we're educating, future executives and future regulators and future politicians. And so part of what we're doing is equipping people with a, kind of like an almost domain general set of skills that that should have helpful payoffs down the line. And then, I don't know, but then the pessimistic thought is just, I do think we have to be clear-eyed about the fact, as I see it, the fact that there's only so much we can do, right? Especially if we're thinking about AI ethics education in the higher ed sector, right? I mean, there's only so much I can do, that any of us can do, to really get someone into the position of recognizing that something fishy is going on, being empowered to do something about it, knowing what to do about it. And so I think I think part of what the question draws to light is that it's sort of weird in a way to think about, what should happen in AI ethics education without attending to the, dozen other social sectors that interact with that question. So, to really solve the social, I don't know, to avoid ethical and social catastrophe, we're going to have to pull lots of different levers in lots of different arenas. And maybe what this points to is that we really need help on the regulation side, to enforce structures within firms, to enable employee pushback on decision making or something. I mean, this is like, now we're really far away from my area of expertise, but maybe we just need a solution that comes from outside of the education context.
There was another question. Yes.
Yes, thank you everyone for the free-ranging, wide scope discussion. As someone who has to teach ethics to emerging media students, I'd like to know pragmatically what one piece of advice you would give to me about what it is that I need to do to teach effectively this topic. And we have a global panel here, and so I would welcome just from each of you one piece of advice. I've got my pen ready.
All right, do you want to start maybe?
No, in a position of advice giver.
Okay, who wants to start?
Top of what we already said. In fact, the question is about effectiveness.
What one thing should I try to get over onto the students? What do I need to achieve if there's only one thing?
Did you hear that?
Sorry. Thing tangible that I can develop or teach them.
Did you hear that clearly online?
I think so. Yeah, it's just priming, massive imposter syndrome, and so I don't know how. I'll just start so that's someone starts. I mean, but a jokey remark, but it's there's a sincere kernel of truth. I've only been doing this so long, and so I'll just report this in the spirit of. Here's something that we kind of found out by messing around with a bunch of different things and seeing what worked here, and that's that. I think for like a lot of traditional philosophical education in higher ed, like a lot of what we do in philosophy classrooms really doesn't make any sense, or is really not useful in the kind of context that we're teaching in CS, and not useful for the kinds of learning outcomes that we're pushing for. So when I'm working with new postdocs in our program or new grad students in our program, I guess, one thing that I try to impart is that you really need to, structure opportunities for students to do something with, with the knowledge that you're trying to impart. So that, if you've got 12 weeks to teach ethical theory or whatever, fine, you can spend a lot of time up at the blackboard, and lecturing on Mill. But if you are trying to enable students to be able to do something at the end of a few hours with them, then your primary job is to like structure iterated practice for them. You want them to be able to do something, so we know how to get people to do things. It's you like show them how to do it and then help them practice it. So this is a long-winded way, I guess, of saying that it seems to me that in this arena, maybe certainly not uniquely, but it's among the arenas in which active learning really has to take center stage. Okay, that's what I got.
I would agree, and I would add an Aristotelian twist to the story. So between too abstract and too applied, and that's the most difficult thing for me. So if you go too abstract, exactly, you lose students. They don't get the point. They don't see why this is relevant. If you get too close to their discipline, then they also believe you're irrelevant because they're
Yes.
the technical things. So how to show them that that what they do in practice is important, but then still they're missing an important theoretical element, and that's what you're bringing. But you have to bring in their own terms, but not too much in their own terms, otherwise they think you already know it, right? So I think that's a bit of the trick, I would say.
Because I think the fact that you ask this question shows what a great teacher you are, and I picture is that your students love you because you care about them. Otherwise, you would have asked this question. And to share something also, something I found that my students like, especially because we want them to think about stakeholders, and they're 18, 21-year-olds. So what is a stakeholder? So I noticed that I've been using an article by Sven Hansen that looks at 3 categories: when risk exposed, risk beneficiaries, and risk decision makers. And I try to have a discussion with students, but also to let them discuss in their group, okay, for this ethical situation, for this situation, who are the risk exposed? And when if we see that there are demographic categories, because it is often the case that there are specific demographic categories that keep occurring irrespective of what the problem is that we're dealing with. To say, okay, next step, how do we bring in these categories into finding a solution? So I don't in a way prompt them to come up with a solution, but I prompt them to come up with a sort of participatory technique to bring these risk exposed that are not part of usual processes as very partners and also as experts in a way when thinking about this topic further.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, something to say. Just in addition to that, please, when giving senior roles to the students, it should kind of represent a diverse perspective. So it's very fair, it connects to them differently. So that's just my contribution there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we have time for one more question, maybe. If anyone. Yes, Marcus.
I mean, this probably isn't a question for 5 minutes, but it relates also to a point that Dan mentioned a while ago in the chat. I think we've heard some really interesting ideas about how the teaching of ethics in this kind of area could be done differently in the future in different ways. I thought Linda's summary from a broadly sort of African perspective was interesting. I think so much of it comes down to funding, right? So often in universities, even a pretty well-resourced university like this one, it's so difficult to get extra teaching staff. I mean, professors, university teaching officers, as we call them here. And so it normally ends up with existing teaching staff who are underpaid, overworked, being asked to take on more things. And I think in these areas, some people will take it on because they believe it to be important. They see it almost as a vocational thing. But you shouldn't exploit people just because they see something as being a vocation, right? And so I think one of the things going forward is perhaps the importance of longer term funding for these initiatives. I mean, things like the EU funding that I guess, funds things like ethics and everything, really great. If that peters out after a few years, then potentially the initiative dies. And again, the Mozilla Foundation funding, for the embedded ethics initiative, brilliant. I think it's really important. I think it's doing good work. Is that going to be there in 10 years? That could be there in 15 years? That could be there in 20 years? I think there'll still be a need for it, but the short-termism can be problematical. So, as I say, that's not a topic for 4 minutes, but it seemed to me that it was kind of worth just mentioning at least.
Yeah. Does anyone want to add to that, or? I mean, I suppose there are no real solutions at this point, but any thoughts? Feel free.
To the topic of funding, I would think I would add also what seems like a surface level problem, and that is of the crowded curriculum or the crowded course syllabus. And when you say, let's introduce ethics as well, we make room for ethics, but we'll have to remove the essential skills or needs to have, which leads us to the deeper and real problem. How to make ethics, and it can be AI ethics, can be engineering ethics, can be media ethics, seen as a relevant component of the professional development of our students.
Especially when big companies like to go there, ethics departments, not very good messages.
I totally agree. I can just say that I totally agree. It should be structural.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be just a one-off project, or it should be embedded in the structure of the university deeply. And how to do that, I think it's a big challenge, but it's the challenge for politically. Yeah.
We can use that wall space free by no longer having to teach students to write essays.
Yeah, I was just going to add, something, and then I see Diane in the chat. I think makes a point that's sort of complementary to what I had in mind. Collaboration helps because we can sort of speak with one voice to the relevant decision makers. And then I would just say, I have only my own experience here to speak from, but I think that we've been. I didn't know what to expect when I started collaborating with computer scientists, and have just been floored by the amount of enthusiasm that they have for bringing in normative expertise, into their classrooms and into some of their wider projects. And, it is what it is, right? They have more clout than we do with the people who control the purse strings, so to speak. So, if in the short term, what's required is that you find, a small cohort of people who do have access to funding, and you get them to, speak with you and say, look, this is something that we really need for our students. And now, here I am embodying, sort of giving voice to the CS side, and it's like a kind of education that we can't provide by ourselves. And so, we want this, and you have to resource it. We've had some success with that, but I think the premise of the question is exactly right. I mean, long-term stable, foundational funding for these kinds of enterprises should be the end goal. Some of that is like boring stuff about getting university development offices to understand what we're doing and, answer our emails instead of, somebody else's. And I think that's going to take a while, and it's going to take a while for foundational funding, to sort of get wise to what's going on. I guess I'm cautiously optimistic about that, but I think it's going to take a while.
Okay, maybe we can end on this cautious.
Cautious optimism. There.
Yeah, so thank you very much to all the speakers and panelists, Jeff, Linda, Filippo, and Diana. Thank you so much for joining us today. I also want to thank the audience, of course, everyone who came in person, and also the people who joined us online. I want to thank Yuna Yang, who's over there and who did a lot of admin work in the background. Yes, and I'm sure this will just be the first discussions or events of this kind, hopefully, and we will be able to talk again in the future. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.